Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's great to see you. I hope I find you well. And today I'm really grateful to be joined by Ben Jones of Heljan. And we're going to be talking a little bit about some of the new models that are coming through, and in particular the Class 25, which is imminent on arrival in the UK. So come with me in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories. But hi there, Ben. How are you doing? It's great to see you, and welcome to the channel.
Hi, Jenny. Really well, thanks. And thanks for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here.
No worries. And yesterday as well, actually, the time of recording, Heljan have just scored a hat trick in the Model Rail Awards. So congratulations on Best O-Gauge model with the Class 50, as well as sweeping the board on 009 with the Manning Wardle getting the Best Locomotive and Heljan getting the overall 009 manufacturer of 2020. So how important are these awards to manufacturers in the industry?
Well, I think they really are important because they're voted for by our customers, by the people who actually buy the models. So they're it's a good indication of how much people value what we produce.
Very much. And I know that the Manning Wardle locomotive in particular, it's one which actually got me into 009 modelling. So I think it's a very deserved win on that front. And yeah, there's some tough competition there because there's quite a few other manufacturers coming in to the 009 scene. So it's well done to actually come out on top of that pile. But what I actually want to turn to now is you've got your new Class 25 model, which has been in development for around 2 years, I think it is, and they are imminent in the UK in the shops. I've been looking at a lot of the photographs of these, and I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more about this model. Now, we've had a Class 25 in the UK on the market for a number of decades now. And I'm just wondering what it was about the 25s that made Heljan look at it and think, we can bring a new model to the market that really takes this very widespread class of locomotive to a new level.
Well, primarily we'd done it in O-Gauge. And we were really pleased with how particularly the second version, the late body Class 25 turned out. And it really, I felt that it really did capture the look of a 25. And to me, there was a gap in the market for that model, but reduced to 00. And it's, the existing products are, I mean, obviously there's a 25 that's been around since the early 2000s, maybe a bit earlier than that. I know people have never been entirely happy with it. So we thought there was an opportunity for us to deliver something of the quality of our O-Gauge model, but in 00.
And I mean, the Class 25, very long-lasting class, has gone through a whole host of minor modifications throughout their lifespan, number of different subclasses. I noticed looking at some of the photographs, you've even tooled up for what a lot of people would think perhaps even minor detail differences, like the steps having separate detail fitted plates to be able to represent them with the plated over finish. How important has that been to capture a lot of these detail variants which haven't been addressed on previous models?
Well, I think we're moving into an era now with 00 models where people aren't satisfied to just have one body moulding. Obviously, as these classes, not just 25s, but all classes sort of move through their career, they had lots of little minor changes. Some had fairly major changes, but, there were lots of things like covers over footsteps, covers over boiler panels, things like that. And they weren't always applied uniformly. So you'll see some locos that have maybe got 2 out of 3 steps plated or non-plated, or there's so much variety, there's so much variation across these big classes that we thought it was the best way to actually do that was to allow people to sort of configure their models themselves as they see fit. So with the 25, it comes with a bag of etch brass footstep covers for locos that had the boiler steps plated over, and you also get the larger boiler grill plated over plate as well, so you can have it with or without, as well as all the other bits like snow ploughs and pipes and buffer beam pipes and couplings.
I've also been looking back over previous models and photographs of the prototypes. And one of the areas that a lot of people talk about is at the front, where you've got this quite complex curves on the front of the cab roof around the code boxes. How important has it been to get that absolutely right on this model?
Well, I mean, it's important to get as much of the look of the loco right as possible. I mean, it's not specific to one particular area. Obviously, the sort of face of it is always important because that's the first thing people look at. But you've got to try and get the attention to detail on all parts of the loco.
Very much, and I suppose scaling it down from the O gauge model, you've already got that head start, that you've already had that model out there that's had the public reaction to it. Was there a lot of development work that needed to go in to take that original O gauge CAD file and actually turn it into the double O gauge model?
Yeah, I mean, you start again basically, but we started from what we felt was a very good base that had really good feedback. The good thing about scaling down from O gauge to double O is that you're able to take a lot of the small details with you. Some of the stuff is too small. Becomes too small in double O gauge to be replicated, so maybe it has to be moulded on. But a lot of the detail we've been able to carry over onto the double O model, so there's a lot of finesse particularly on the bogies and the underframe that hasn't been seen previously.
I'm just wondering, what features are these models bringing to the market that we maybe haven't seen in previous versions of Class 25s on the market? Are they going to be coming with a lot more functionality with regard to DCC? Is there anything in particular in terms of the electronics within them that you're particularly proud to be able to bring to the market?
Well, that's coming in the sort of next generation. This is a bit of a halfway house between previous generations of Heljan locos and what we're working on with the Class 45 and the 47. So the 25 has got cab lights, which I don't think any 25s have ever had before. It's got illuminated head code panels. There's no engine room lights on this one, as we'll be introducing on things like the Class 47. And some of the functionality, some of the more sophisticated functions and functionality that we've got on the 45 and the 47 and some of the O-gauge locos that are coming isn't on this, because this predates that process, really. This model's actually been, the 25's actually been in progress for about 3 years. Mm-hmm. It's probably because of COVID and because of factory delays. This is actually, the 25's about a year later than we expected. So it's not the full leap forward just yet, but not in terms of the electronics anyway. But we think that the physical Formula Loco is a big jump forward.
And one of the other areas as well that I noticed that you've got two other versions of it, the Ethels, and this is something which I was actually very impressed that you've gone to a lot of trouble with the Ethel locomotives, even down to having them where, whilst they still retain the pickups, the lighting, the DCC functionality, you're actually bringing them to the market without a motor or gear train, so they can be hauled behind another locomotive. I'm just curious what the decision was behind doing that rather than having them with a fully functioning drivetrain, because presumably there's a different process in the manufacture that these have to go through.
It certainly confused the factory when we told them that we wanted a batch of models without motors in. Yeah. It took them a while to get their head around that. But within this batch of locos, this first batch of 25s, there's actually 3 distinct groups. There's one thing I didn't mention earlier that we didn't do on the O-gauge 25 was to do the original exhaust port, the original roof arrangement. So the green locos and the early blue ones in this batch have the original exhaust port like this. I'm trying to hold it up to the screen so you can see it. It's got the circular exhaust port on there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an original version. Then the later locos have got the revised head coat panel, and then you've got the Ethels at the end. Over the years, I suspect a lot of people who are watching will have spent a lot of time converting Class 25s using Craftsman kits or A1 models kits or whatever into Ethels, and they'll have spent a lot of time and effort doing that. We thought that Scottish Railways are so popular that the Ethel was it justified the extra effort of creating something, of creating a proper Ethel, so one that's not powered. But early on in the process, when we were discussing it with the people we sort of consult with, they said, "Well, make sure if you do the Ethel that if it doesn't have a motor, it still has the ability to fit sound, because we'll still want to have the 25 idling away with DCC sound, even if it's coupled in a train." So we talked to the factory and said, right, this is what we want to do. We want the ability to fit the sound and have the pickups in and the lights and that sort of thing. And eventually, once they got their heads around it, they did say it was possible. But we felt that the popularity of Scottish Railways in particular justified the extra effort of creating the Ethels.
So the Ethels themselves, and they're actually tooled to be an Ethel with the detail differences, rather than just being a re-livery of an ordinary Class 25.
No, I mean, externally, it looks like a 25. It's a re-livery. Unfortunately, there's no ETH cables.
So how many of the different subclasses have you actually tooled up the ability to make? Have you been able to have the means within the tooling to produce all the different subclasses?
No, we haven't done that. We're just doing the late body version. Obviously, there's other people who are working on 25s. There's another manufacturer that has done the 24-1. Obviously, Bachmann have released that recently and have announced their intention to do the 25-0 and the early body versions. And I suspect they probably had plans to work through to the later body ones as well. But we were in a position to produce a good quality late body 25, so that's what we've done. We've no plans at the moment to do the early body versions.
So I presume the idea is to complement other people's ranges rather than to try and compete directly.
That was the original idea, yeah. Rather than competing on lots of different products, we'll try and complement what's out there or what is coming.
Excellent. And in terms of initial releases, you've got the full lifespan of these locomotives, from initial delivery liveries right through to end of life liveries. So in the first release, are we going to be seeing pretty much every version of livery for every period that these locomotives worked in?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of choice in this first batch. There are, including TMC's exclusive edition, there are 13 different models. There's original green and a weathered version in original green. There's green with the full yellow ends. There's early blue with a small yellow panel, and early blue with full yellow ends and D numbers. There's 3 different BR blue ones with tops numbers, including a Western region one for that period when they worked in the West Country. And then there's a Midland region and, excuse me a second while I reach over and get it, and a Scottish region one as well. And there's Tamworth Castle in its ice cream van form as 25.912. Mm-hmm. That's been done as 25.322 before, but never as 25.912 renumbered. And then there's Tamworth Castle in its full two-tone green with full yellow ends version as well. And then 2 Ethels.
Yes. So, I mean, it's a good range, including, I think, the TMC Special Commission. That was the final locomotive to carry BR green amongst the 25s. Am I correct in thinking?
That's what we believe. Yes, that's the justification for doing it. Yes,
that's one that really caught my eye when I was looking through the pictures, because it's a great opportunity during the BR Blue period to have something just that little bit different that does fit in with that period, but it gives you the green livery in the locomotive rather than this overall blue, which a lot of people maybe associate with the late 70s, early 80s.
I think that's why that that period is becoming quite popular because you've got that opportunity to have green and blue locos. And then across the sort of surviving green locos, there's a huge amount of variety in decoration and things like that. So green locos with BR arrows on and all that sort of thing, and tops numbers. So I fully understand why people model that period. It's really interesting.
Well, I'm really looking forward to these. What price point should we be expecting this coming out at? What's the RRP on these? And will there be factory-fitted sound options as well?
There's no factory-fitted sound on this, although I understand that Ian from Lego Biffoman, he's prepared a sound file ready for the introduction of this model. And I'm sure that other sound suppliers are doing exactly the same. But we don't supply it factory-fitted. Not yet. That will come. But it's not happening yet on the 25. And the suggested retail price on these is 179.
Excellent. I assume that the internals of the locomotive is designed to take the sound fitting, and there's plenty of space for speakers in there.
There's plenty of space inside, yes. Yeah. What this doesn't have, what previous Heljan locos have been well known for, is having a really big solid block of metal inside there. Mm-hmm. The 25 is quite different to that. It's much more sort of paired away so that there's room for DCC and a speaker.
I also want to turn to some of the other locomotives that are coming through that have been announced in the range. We talked a little bit about the Class 45 and how this will herald a new generation of models with extra features. How is that development coming along?
Not bad at all.
Oh, wow, that looks brilliant. So how close on after the 25s are we going to be seeing the 45s coming to the market?
We're still not 100% happy with these. I mean, this is a factory decorated sample, but it's not to the level that we would like it to be. Mm-hmm. There's still some things to improve and some things to correct on it. Mechanically and electrically, it's signed off. It's there. It's a beautiful runner. But we're still we're waiting for the factory to come back from Chinese New Year, and then we'll have a real push on the 45s to get the deco right. But yeah, in terms of you're asking about features on this, it will have separately switched tail lights on independent functions, separately switched cab lights on independent functions, and then you'll also have the option of obviously the original version with. Excuse me while I reach over. The original version with the head codes, glazed head codes, and then the sealed beam ends, and then the final version with the extra headlight as well.
Brilliant. And are there any plans to follow on from the 45 with any of the other peaks, or is this being purely developed as being a definitive Class 45 model alone?
No, we'd like to. I mean, we've not made any decisions yet, but it would be logical to move on and do some of the other versions as well. We've been asked quite a lot for a Class 46, and then we've also had a few requests for a 44 as well. So, and I suspect in the long term we might do a split head code Class 45. Although obviously TMC are doing the early split head code ones, D11 to D15. So we'll let them. We should let them sell through first before we do any standard split head code 45s. Right.
And one of the other models that was recently announced that has really caught my eye is the Class 02 shunter. This is going to be, I presume, one of the smallest 00 gauge model that Heljan have done. But it's also, I mean, it's quite a bold move to do an 040 shunter in terms of getting the reliability of running. And I know you're planning on bringing this out in O gauge first to be followed by a 00 example. What in particular attracted you to the Class 02? Because it's something that's never ever been done ready to run, as far as I'm aware, before.
No, I mean, I suspect a lot of people watching will have built the DJH starter kit of the 02 over the years, either in O gauge or in 00. I think we've all been through that phase. Personally, I mean, I like small locos, and I thought we thought there was a gap in the market for a four-wheel BR shunter to modern standards. There are lots of six-wheel ones now. There's decent 03s and 08s, but there's no good quality four-wheel shunter except industrial ones. So we thought there was a a gap in the market for a smaller shunter. So being a Sheffield lad and always having a soft spot for the O2s, that was my favoured sort of option right from the beginning. But it also made sense because it's an attractive loco. Obviously, quite a lot of them survived into industrial use as well. So there's and are still around in preservation. So there's it's got an extended life that way beyond its BR career, and it's just a lovely looking thing.
Definitely, and it's quite an interesting potted history with BR. With I think there's 3 examples did get tops numbers, so actually surprisingly late lasting. But some very curious livery combinations in terms of being still in BR green but with the tops number, and then moving on into industrial use. I've seen so many photographs online of them in really quite striking liveries. I think there was at least one at Workington in this kind of almost like dazzle yellow and black livery. So are there plans to explore a lot of these very unusual liveries in future releases as you go through?
Well, there are some industrial liveries in the first batch, and there will be more further down the line. We've got to be a little bit careful because obviously some of the industrial ones that didn't come from BR, there's quite a lot of detail differences. I mean, it'd be good to get some feedback from customers about whether they're willing to sort of overlook these detail differences or whether they're just happy to have something in these really interesting liveries. That's something we'll have to do a bit of market research on when we get back to doing shows and things like that. But I mean, there's potential to do lots of different things with it. Obviously, the first batch we've announced. We suspect that pretty close behind that there will be a second batch as well because we expect them to do really well and sell through. So we've got ideas for a second batch already.
And how difficult is it to design such a small locomotive and try and keep it so it will run effectively through point work, and even to get space inside it for the DCC decoders? Is there going to be room inside it to take a sound fitting as standard?
Yeah, it's very. To answer your first question, it's extremely difficult. Obviously the design of the O2 with the open and quite big windows in the cab means that you can't really have anything except the proper cab detail inside the cab. So you're restricted to just that very short bonnet. But we've got a motor and managed to get a motor and a flywheel in there. There's also an X18 DCC interface under the bonnet. There is provision for a speaker, an iPhone type speaker, right, that is in the. We've put a sort of moulded outline in the cab roof, and there'll be wires coming through from the DCC, from the PCB, that will protrude through a hole in the cab, so you'll be able to wire a speaker in it in the cab roof.
Right, so it'll be quite an unobtrusive fit, but making good use of the space.
That's what we've tried to do. I mean, there's really nowhere else to put it. There wasn't space under the bonnet by the time you'd put the motor and the flywheel in there. We've gone for as discreet as we can up inside the cab roof.
And what sort of timescale are we looking on for the release of the Class O2? Have you set a date that you're looking to have it done by?
Not really. No, it's very difficult to set dates for anything at the moment. There's a huge backlog already of projects that are sort of signed off and waiting for production. The O2 is the CAD's done for both versions. So we're waiting really for the factories to return to something near normal, so that we can clear the backlog and then start working on the tooling for the O2 and the in both scales. But I suspect we might see a sample this year. Hopefully, I would be very disappointed if we don't see some running samples this year. But they won't be released until 2022.
And one of the other things as well, that Heljan does a lot of O-gauge models, and there does seem to be a lot of crossover between if a model comes out in O-gauge, a lot of the time you're bringing out a double O version and vice versa. Is that something when you're designing models, when you're looking at new models to bring to the range, that you have in mind, or does it just become a logical progression that if a model proves popular in one scale, then it kind of justifies the viability of it in another?
I think it's done on a case by case basis, really. with the Great Western Railcar, for instance, the AEC railcar, from the very outset, that was designed, that was intended to be a double O and an O gauge model, sort of developed in parallel. And we did the O gauge one first, and then, as I mentioned, with the 25, it's easier to do the O gauge one and then shrink it down and try and take as much detail as possible with you to the smaller scale. So from the outset, that was done as a joint project in double O and O, in the way that the O2 will be as well. The 25, that was done in O gauge first without any thought of doing a double O version. It was only later on, once we got the feedback when the 25 came out, that we thought, actually, there's potentially for a double O model. And then some other things. The 47, obviously, we've retooled recently in O gauge. And we decided to do a new 0047 because the tooling was worn out on the old version. And we thought it was about time that because we'd done a lot of work and a lot of research on the O gauge 47, we could put that into making a new 001. But they were two separate decisions, really. So it's, as I say, it's a case by case basis, really.
And I think as well, it's I'll get told off if I don't ask, but with the O gauge Class 50, the 2020 O gauge Locomotive of the Year award, is that something that you might consider doing in double O? Or, you know, I'm obviously aware that there is already a double O model on the market. Will that be something that perhaps influences your decision maybe not to do that?
There's obviously a fairly high spec Class 50 already on the market, although it's older than you realise. It's been around since, I think, 2004, that model. So there's obviously some pressure for a new model to higher standards with some of the things we've talked about with the 45 and the 47, with the new electronics and stuff like that. We don't have any plans to do a double O Class 50 at the moment because we've got so many other things in the pipeline. But I suspect, so, you know, it will happen at some point.
Very much. And also, I mean, in terms of other models, you've announced the Class 104, which is one that's been requested for so long. Was that actually quite a big decision to make that move into multiple units?
Yes, because it's obviously a much bigger task than doing an individual loco. Particularly on something like Class 104, where you've got, I think we're tooling four different vehicles, and the design work is obviously multiplied over those different vehicles. So yeah, it's a big decision to move into DMUs, but obviously there are so many locos around. The market is really saturated, so we're looking for new areas to move into, new opportunities, things like that. And the 104 is, they lasted a long time. They went over big areas of the country, and they really fit with things like particularly things like the 25. I mean, you know, the 25s and 104s ran together their whole lives. So it fits with other things that we're doing and makes it a more coherent range.
And one of the other things as well I noticed about the Heljan range is there's very much a focus on locomotives and not necessarily so much on rolling stock. Has that been a conscious decision, or are we going to be seeing more in the way of rolling stock coming through from Heljan in the future?
We'd love to do more rolling stock. The issue we're having at the moment is, there's a couple of issues really. On the coaching stock side of it, we're pretty well covered for coaching stock that matches with the sort of locos that we produce. So Mark 1s, Mark 2s, Mark 3s, obviously there are lots of them around. There are some gaps, but you know, and we've looked into those. But on the wagons side, the problem we're having at the moment is costings really. Although you'd think that a wagon might not cost as much as a loco or a coach to design and tool and manufacture, the costs are actually quite high for what it is. Particularly as you get more detailed and more complicated and things like that. So, and the costs we're getting back from the factory at the moment, and there's other things factored in like exchange rates and things like that. They just mean that it's not as viable to do it at the moment as it used to be. So we will keep looking at it. there are lots of wagons we would like to do, particularly in O gauge. Actually, we have a long list of wagons that we'd like to do in O gauge. It's just a case of getting the numbers right.
And how big a percentage of the market now is O gauge? Because I mean, if we went back 10, 15 years, O gauge was very much this premium brand, and a lot of people, if you wanted O gauge, you had to buy some very expensive models or just build them yourself. And now we're seeing a lot of ready-to-run models coming through from multiple manufacturers. Do you see O gauge as being a very big growth area?
It is growing, definitely. I mean, everything we've produced over the last couple of years has sold through really quickly, which gives us an indication that there's more and more interest out there. I mean, even some of the things, some of the early locos, like the High-Mech and the Class 37, the split head code Class 37, that were from the very early days of Heljan's O gauge production. We've rerun them recently, and they've sold really well again. So, yeah, there's definitely growing demand, and it's primarily for locos. What we find is that if you're going to have a correct balance, like the real railway, you would probably have 20 wagons for every loco. But the balance on model railways is nowhere near that. It's probably more like one wagon per loco, or one loco per wagon, or something like that. The people buy lots of locos, so that's why we keep producing them, and that's where the demand. That's what we get asked for most of all, these locos. So yeah, but it's growing. We don't. Sorry, just to finish this point, O gauge is definitely growing. We're still seeing plenty of demand in double O. And demand for new things and new versions of classes that already exist. So yeah, it's quite healthy at the moment.
And with the 009 as well, obviously you've scooped the two major awards from Model Rail in 2020 for the Manning Wardle. You've also got the 242 Baldwin coming through as well. Is 009 becoming quite a growth area? And in doing all this work in making the mechanisms work in that much smaller, tighter sized models, is N-gauge something that Heljan might consider as well in the future?
We've no plans to move into N-gauge, but with Lynn coming, I think people will be really. I mean, anybody who like the Manning Wardles, we think that they'll be even more impressed by Lynn. I mean, personally, I think it's a beautiful little thing, and we think it's another step up from the Manning Wardles. So we think that'll really impress people when it arrives, and it's not that far away now. Should be here in a few weeks. But we think there's certainly more demand for narrow gauge. So we're looking into various options for how we expand what we do in narrow gauge. Yeah.
And as a keen railway modeller yourself, is it very difficult to separate out the enthusiast, the railway modeller, from the business side of things with Heljan? I mean, is there a temptation to kind of push for models in your personal interest because you want a model rather than thinking on the commercial saleability of a model? Or do you have to very much keep those two aspects separate from each other?
It's very tempting. Sometimes the two things do intersect, and in the case of the O2, it's something I've always wanted. But we also think that commercially, there's a lot of interest in it, and it'll sell. There's various things that I would like to see modelled, but I know that would be a commercial disaster. So you do have to separate that. Fortunately, over the last however many years, 20 years, I've been working in the model railway trade, either on the magazine side of it or now on the production side. You kind of learn to keep the two apart. I always base what we plan to do, what our future models should be on things that we get asked for by customers, either on social media or at shows, things like that. You start to build up a picture of what people are really interested in. So if you get asked for something once in 3 years, you think, well, perhaps there's not that much demand for it. If you get asked for something at every show by different people, sometimes you get asked for something at every show by the same person. That's you have to take account of that. But yeah, if we get asked for, like the O gauge Class 26 that we're doing, since I started with Heljan, every show I've been to, we've been asked by people to redo the All Gauge Class 26. So it obviously made sense that there was demand out there for it. But yeah, so I mean, like the other manufacturers do, we base our plans on really what customers are asking for rather than what we want. But the way I try and divorce my hobby from my from the day job is that my layout is HO scale German, so it's a complete rake, and so it's that's the pleasure side, and this is the British stuff is the work side.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for taking the time out to speak to us. And it was really great to get an inside view on all those new great models coming through from Heljan. And in particular, the Class 25, which I believe at the time of recording should be in the country for next week, I believe it is.
Yeah, as we speak, I believe they're just about due to arrive in Denmark.
Right. And really looking forward to seeing them. So look, thank you very much for having a chat with me. And look, you take care and have yourself a great day. And thank you everybody for tuning in and watching this interview with Ben Jones from Heljan. It's been really, really informative. Don't forget to click the like button and consider sharing this too out on social media. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, do consider doing that and clicking that bell to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. But until next time, this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying thanks for watching, take care, and happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Steers, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grantline Products, Sam Yates, John N from NC, and NYMR-ish. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.